Well, good afternoon, everybody, and good morning. It is great to see everyone here this afternoon, and again, morning, wherever you are. My name is Stacey Stewart. I'm President and CEO of March of Dimes, and we're so excited about today's Healthy Mom, Strong Babies webinar, and I'm so excited about the topic, so excited to hear from our panelists today. I think you'll be excited and really interested to hear what all of them have to say. We've been doing this since the beginning of this pandemic, trying to bring really relevant information to all of you all, to pregnant women, to moms, to families, to healthcare providers, and so many others who really are interested to hear and get more information about how they should think about a variety of topics. And we talked about a lot of different things. Today, we're really going to be talking about a topic that is first and foremost on everybody's mind right now, and that's about the COVID-19 vaccine. And certainly we want to talk more about whether or not this vaccine is safe for pregnant women, safe for lactating women, and how pregnant and lactating women should be thinking about the vaccine and trying to stay safe while we're still in the midst of a pretty dangerous pandemic. So I just want to say thank you all for joining. Please remember that you can always ask a question at any time in our chat. Our panelists will be happy and they're prepared to take your questions. So we want to make sure that you're fully engaged and you have a chance to get all of your questions asked and answered. And to do that, we'll jump right into it. And again, thank you for joining us today. You know, this topic is certainly very important to all of us. And there have been lots and lots of questions raised around the vaccine and whether or not it's safe. Everyone's concerned about whether or not it's safe for them, but certainly pregnant women for sure, and lactating women have been very concerned, not only for themselves, but for the health of their babies as well. And the thing that's really challenging is that there's been very limited data. But we know that pregnant women, and we've known this since the beginning of the pandemic, are at increased risk of severe illness if they do contract COVID-19, which is why getting the vaccine is such a critical decision for them to try to stay safe. Recent CDC data has shown that symptomatic pregnant women with COVID-19 had a 70% higher risk of death if they do contract COVID-19 as compared to non-pregnant women. And data tells us that the symptoms of COVID-19 may be worse for pregnant people who are older, who have pre-existing conditions like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, or gestational diabetes. Pregnant women with COVID-19 may be at increased risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes, such as preterm birth, and we'll certainly talk about that. Fortunately, though, most newborns who've tested positive for COVID-19 have had very mild or even no symptoms and have recovered fully. However, there have been some reports about newborns who have become very sick. So it's certainly something we have to be at some level concerned about. And even though the data has been very limited about COVID-19 vaccines for pregnant people, the CDC tells us that for pregnant and lactating people, they say, quote, getting vaccinated is a personal choice. Any of the currently authorized COVID-19 vaccines can be offered to people who are pregnant or breastfeeding. And again, another quote, if you have questions about getting vaccinated, a conversation with your healthcare provider might help, but is not required. Certainly, it's something we would recommend at the March of Dimes. We know that there are clinical trials going on to include pregnant women. We know that part of the reason we don't have enough information about how safe it is for pregnant women is because pregnant women were not included in the clinical trials initially. We know that that has changed and that Pfizer announced some time ago that it is now including pregnant women in those clinical trials. But that data is still yet to come in terms of the real evidence around safety for pregnant women. We know that vaccine manufacturers are also monitoring data from people in clinical trials in maybe other areas who've received vaccine and have become pregnant. And then the last thing that we've seen is, and Dr. Fauci has talked about this, is with all the women that have registered in VSafe, which is a CDC program to track sort of the effects of the vaccine for people who are signed up to report on the results of the vaccine after they receive it. We've seen many thousands of women who are a part of the VSafe program. And some time ago, Dr. Fauci said there have been no red flags. And that was based on when we saw 10,000 pregnant women as a part of the VSafe program who had received their COVID-19 vaccine. So with all of that said, there's still a lot of questions. We want to get to those questions and talk about what your questions are, and also want to make sure that you have a chance to hear from some experts who've really been looking at this issue very deeply. So again, please feel free to type your questions in the chat and we'll take them, as we go. And again, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and today we have just an incredible and esteemed group of doctors and researchers who know a lot about the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, and been looking at this issue around people who are pregnant and breastfeeding who receive the vaccine. We also have a pregnant mother who will share her own experience of receiving the vaccine and sort of navigating all the information, navigating through what must have been a somewhat challenging decision that she made, but we want to make sure you hear her personal story as well. And so I'll introduce our panelists right now. The first I'll introduce is Dr. Cersei Agard, who is an expert in maternal fetal medicine and endowed chair of obstetrics and gynecology at Baylor College of Medicine and the Texas Children's Hospital. She serves as a vice chair of OBGYN research and is a professor in the departments of molecular and human genetics, cellular biology, physiology, and biophysics at Baylor. Dr. Cersei Agard, thanks for joining us. We also have Dr. Shakiba Henderson, who just recently joined us at the March of Dimes. She leads our Office of Maternal and Child Health Impact. She is our Deputy Chief Medical and Health Officer at the March of Dimes. She is a board certified OBGYN herself. She previously led the CDC's program in support of state-based perinatal quality collaboratives. We are so thrilled to have her on the team at the March of Dimes and thrilled that she's with us today on this panel. Dr. Sam Perry, who's been a longtime researcher and friend of March of Dimes, is a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the Perelman School of Medicine at University of Pennsylvania and is the chief of the maternal fetal medicine division in the University of Pennsylvania's health system. He is also, again, as I mentioned, a March of Dimes research grantee. He has been a part of our Prematurity Research Center at University of Pennsylvania, started and funded by March of Dimes, and he is currently studying the impact of COVID-19 on pregnant women. And then, of course, last but not least, we have Kate Reno, is a mom of one and with one more on the way. And she learned the power of being her own advocate for her experiences with undiagnosed and misdiagnosed medical conditions. Kate is really passionate about empowering other women to be advocates for themselves. She's here today because she wanted to share more information about what resources she relied on and what resources she believes pregnant women should rely on to think about their own experience in potentially receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. And certainly she'll share her own process of decisioning around that as well. So again, I want to thank all of you all for joining. And again, please submit your questions as we go. And as you hear things, we can stop and take answers along the way. So I may go by first name basis just because it makes it more fun, if you don't mind. But Cersei, you are a maternal fetal specialist. You are an esteemed professor and physician in Texas, and one of our great partners there in Texas. Can you talk to us a little bit about these vaccines? We've heard a lot about them. A lot of people are becoming far more educated about mRNA vaccines than we ever have before. But talk to us about the vaccines. We've got two that are mRNA, another Johnson & Johnson is not. Just give us a brief understanding of the vaccines and what is it about these vaccines that should give pregnant and lactating women comfort that they might be safe for them to consider, obviously, what their healthcare providers advise and support.
Yeah, great question. So these are really the new generation of vaccine safety. So both of these vaccines, both the mRNA vaccine and what we're calling the Johnson & Johnson or the adenoviral vector vaccine, are truly the next generation vaccine safety. And have really been in development for the better part of 10 years to be utilized in exactly this type of setting. A new and emerging virus comes out and we have to very quickly, at the drop of a dime, be able to produce a vaccine that is safe and will be efficacious, meaning highly effective. And so I like to think of them this way. So they're both not only not live vaccines, but they're not even dead or killed vaccines. They're re-engineered vectors or little kind of spaceships, if you will, that contain a blueprint for one protein of the COVID virus. And both of them utilize kind of the same thing, whether it's the mRNA or the adenovirus vaccines. They both are have put in the spike protein gene. And so they're a little blueprint, which means your cell's protein making machinery will sit down and it'll do exactly what it does with all of the other proteins your body makes. It'll make that spike protein and only that spike protein for the COVID vaccine. And then you're off into the races because your immune system has never seen this spike protein before. And it's going to turn around and do a really great job of activating itself and arming itself so that when you encounter that COVID virus, your immune system is already prepared and ready to go. And so I like to remember that these happened in trial before with pregnant women. They were used with Ebola. And had a very good safety record with Ebola. And they also have been used in animal studies and have a good safety record with those animal studies. So this isn't something that just got dreamt up for COVID. This is really something that's been a decade in the making.
So I think that's a lot of what people, especially when you hear people in communities of color, they've been very concerned about the speed of the development of the vaccine. It feels like it just happened overnight. And a lot of what we know about vaccines is that they typically take a long time. But you're saying they've been under development for quite some time. And the science has been really in development for a while.
Yep. And so the last time they were really designed very specifically around pregnancy was Moderna was utilizing the same mRNA vector. So it's hooked up in a lipid or a fat molecule, so it'll bind very easily with fat molecules on our cells as well. And the last time they really were using this was with Zika virus. And they did some very, very nice and elegant work with animal models, showing that it was highly effective when giving it to pregnant mice. And they also used it with monkeys. And so we're able to show that it's both effective and safe in those constructs. Different virus, but same principle. So this isn't that we're experimenting on people right now. This is something that's really been generated with the highest degree of safety in mind. And so I give great credit and applaud to the companies that have had the forethought to develop these vaccines many years ago and now putting them into play in exactly the type of setting we were hoping they would.
That's great. And we'll move on to the next panel. So just a quick question. Are all of these 3 vaccines currently available to pregnant and lactating women?
Yes, they should be immediately available to pregnant and lactating women. That is correct.
All right, great. Thank you. We'll come back to you, Cersei. Shakiba, thanks for joining. As an OBGYN yourself, what do pregnant women need to ask their providers about when they're considering getting this vaccine? What are some of the questions they should be asking if they want to get more information or just really feel more confident about what it would mean for them to receive the vaccine? And you may be on mute, Shakiba, I can't tell.
Huh. Stacey, it looks like Kiba might have dropped.
She may have dropped. Okay, that's fine. We can come back to her. Maybe she's having a Wi-Fi issue. No problem. We'll come back to her. Sam, let me turn it to you. And you're doing a lot of research on a lot of these issues right now around COVID-19 and pregnancy. We know that women are just starting to be included, as I mentioned, in these vaccine trials. Tell us more about why it is pregnant women had not and were not included in the vaccine trials. Why is that the case? And when will we know more about the impact of the vaccines on pregnant women, on this population as a result of the trials?
Thanks, Stacey. The national groups, national OBGYN societies, the American College of OBGYN, we have been advocating for pregnant women to be included in overall clinical trials, but it has been fairly consistent throughout medicine that in trials like this, especially where you're trying to hurry the study of the vaccine over a large population, not to include unique groups in the trials, and one of those is pregnant women. So in fact, these pregnant women were not included in the original trials of the 3 vaccines. And we are advocating for that to be changed in future type studies, really across medicine. Currently, though, and very importantly, you mentioned the CDC's V-Safe program, where now 51,000 women, over 51,000 women, have been enrolled following the vaccine. Pregnant women have been enrolled following receiving the vaccine. And there to date is no increased risk among this large group of women with adverse pregnancy outcomes or effects on the baby. So the comfort level is starting to increase. Now, I forget, either you or Dr. Agard mentioned that there is a Pfizer trial going on for another that is currently being enrolled with 4,000 women. It's very important to understand that trial is an effective is a trial to see if the vaccine is effective. In other words, do pregnant women need the same dose? Do they need more? It's not a trial to see if it's safe. Probably the information we're getting from the CDC surveillance is more important for that. And I think at this point we can start to say that it's safe.
Well, that's good to know. And you've also been doing some research on the effects of COVID-19's impact on the placenta. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what your work is right now, and any news you can share about what you're seeing so far in your research?
Yes, yeah, the March of Dimes has very graciously awarded 2 COVID grants in November of 2020. One to colleagues of ours up at Harvard University, and they're actually looking at the transmission of antibodies across the placenta, either in the setting of infection or vaccine. And remember, the antibodies that the mother makes when she's vaccinated may in fact go across the placenta and help the baby. So there is the potential that the vaccine will be helpful, never mind that we're worried about it being harmful, and they're studying that. We're looking at ways that the COVID itself may impact placental function without actually infecting the placenta. You said early on that babies are not being found with the virus, and we're seeing low rates of infection in the placenta, yet there's high rates of placental abnormalities, placental dysfunction, and pregnancy complications associated with placental dysfunction, such as preeclampsia or preterm birth. So we're actually studying molecules in COVID pregnant patients called extracellular vesicles that have been associated with disease severity, with COVID severity in non-pregnant populations. And we're looking to see the impact of these on placental function in COVID-19 cases.
We're glad you're doing that work. You know, there was a question that came in, and I know Dr. Henderson's back, so we'll come to her in just a sec. I can see her. We did get a question on Facebook saying, are the antibodies found through cord blood different from those found in breast milk? If so, are they equally important as protective to the infant? Or so I don't know if you can answer that, Dr. Perry, and then we can go on.
I don't know if the antibodies are as protective, in the cord blood. I don't know that we know how protective they are either in cord blood or breast milk just yet. We know they're present in cord blood. One of our colleagues who's done a large serosurveillance study here at Penn in pregnant patients and has collected a large sample, and it's just published in, I think it's JAMA Pediatrics within the last month, on the presence of the antibodies in the cord blood. So they're there. I can't tell you that I know for sure how effective they are. I would think they're going to be. And your organization is funding the investigators up at Harvard.
Maybe we can, we'll find out. Yes, because the question is, are the antibodies found in the cord blood different from those found in breast milk? And I assume.
I don't know, but Dr. Cersei is
know.
shaking,
Cersei.
Yeah, so they should be a little bit different, right? So what we find in breast milk should be largely what we call the IgA flavor of antibodies. And the ones that will be in cord blood are the IgG flavor of antibodies. The reason that's important is it's the IgG flavor of antibodies that are the neutralizing antibodies against the virus, so they'll function a little differently. The exciting thing about the ones that we would anticipate are largely in breast milk being IgA is they'll be effective in the gut. And so we know that one of the things that can happen is you can harbor COVID in your gut for a little bit longer. And so the beauty of it is the combination of a baby being once upon a time attached to the umbilical cord and receiving those longer lasting neutralizing IgG antibodies through the cord blood, plus getting the IgA through the milk, is it kind of arms you in a couple different ways. It'll protect your body and it'll make you do things a little bit differently for that developing infant. So that's a good, exciting thing that we should.
Wow, that sounds
good to see.
That sounds really exciting. That's good. Thank you. And I guess more to come, but that sounds great. And Dr. Henderson, I'll go to you now. Thanks for being able to rejoin. And we're getting a bunch of Facebook questions, so I'm going to try to get to a lot of these. So thanks for asking. Keep them coming. We'll get to them. But Dr. Henderson, just to bring you into the conversation, thanks for being on. If a woman is pregnant today, what are some of the questions she should go in sort of armed with to her OBGYN as she's thinking about the vaccine? What should she be asking for, and what kinds of questions would be great to advocate for herself and become better informed?
So the most important reason why we, ask for patients to have conversations with their providers is because every patient has a unique situation that may impact their decision making. And the whole process of deciding on whether to get the vaccine or not depends on weighing the risks and the benefits. And that may vary depending on who the patient is that's presenting to you. So I would ask, that patients, when they're going to their providers, that they will specifically ask questions specific to their situation. So depending on where they are in the pregnancy, so are there any chances that, my risks are different for either getting and having severe complications from the virus versus any potential complications from the vaccine? Does that vary whether I'm just recently diagnosed with a pregnancy versus being close to the end of my pregnancy? I would also advise them to ask about any particular medical conditions they may be having and how that may apply to their risk, their occupation, who lives in their home, what types of exposures they may potentially have based on who they're around, and whether they're at increased risk of being infected, because that would also affect their decision making. And then there are also questions about just, what's happening in the community. So are they in a community where there are high rates of the virus? Are there circulating variants that may be, a potential increased risk of getting the infection? Or, for example, in my case, if I were pregnant, my husband is a physician and he takes care of COVID patients. So a patient who interacts with someone who is exposed potentially should be considered. And then, they need to understand, to ask questions about not only the risks to the infant and to the pregnancy, but also weighing that against the risks to themselves and their health condition. For example, if they have a history of allergies or a history of anaphylaxis, that may be something that you want to consider in the decision making on whether to receive the vaccine and any potential for having a bad effect to getting the vaccine.
So I think it really comes down to an individual decision in it with the advice of your provider. Sam, I want to turn it to Kate, because she obviously had to go through a lot of these questions and answers with her physician, I'm sure. But Sam, it wasn't until now I didn't realize that the vaccine trials will basically prove the effectiveness of the vaccine, not necessarily how safe it is, and that the safety of the vaccine really we're learning and seeing right now in terms of the pregnant women that are enrolled in Be Safe, what the effects of the vaccine are with those that have received a vaccine if they're pregnant. And that was a very important point, I think. But I just want to make sure I've reflected that in the right way.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to understand is that adverse outcomes are going to be rare, vaccinated or not, so that you would need probably many more than the 4,000 women to study outcomes like that. Whereas if you're looking just at, you know, is there uptake? Do the pregnant patients produce antibodies similar to non-pregnant patients? That can be done in the sample size that they're projecting.
Okay. All right, Kate, I want you just to share it. Oh, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry. I
Shakita,
just wanted to
please.
break in quickly with that because there are also, you know, we think about the role of enrolling pregnant women in trials now that really sort of the train has already left the station and there are thousands of women who've already received the vaccine. There are, you know, also we need to think of some of the ethical considerations around giving a pregnant woman a placebo when we have some data already that shows that there is some efficacy. And I know that's come to mind and I've been asked about that as well. And should we proceed with trials after, you know, medications have already been studied and shown to be effective and to be helpful, and to what is the ethics of withholding that then in a trial?
That's a good point.
Yeah, it is. It's a really good point. I do think it's one thing we have to be a little bit cautious of when we say that, because they're not withholding the vaccine in the Pfizer trial, so they're delaying the vaccine. So if you randomize to the placebo arm of the vaccine, you will receive the vaccine once you deliver. And because that interval time period of enrollment is 24 to 34 weeks, you're talking about at the most a 16-week delay. So I think rather than, I don't have a concern around the ethics of that trial. I think it's a valuable trial to do. As Sam pointed out, you know, it is not designed as a safety trial. It'd be unethical for us to do a trial if we thought there were safety concerns. It's designed as a non-inferiority, or are we going to need an extra booster in pregnant women is really what we're going to get out of that trial, because we don't have any safety concerns, and so we would never do that study.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Very good point.
Thank you for that. I want to turn it to Kate, and Kate, just share with us a little bit about your experience and how you thought about some of these questions. And, you know, I'm sure your thought process would be very relevant to a lot of women that are considering the vaccine as well. So share with us your story a little bit.
Yeah, so I agreed to be a part of this because when I was looking for information, there really wasn't any story told by any pregnant person who had decided to get the vaccine. And so I thought, well, if I really wished I could have that resource, why not be a part of it when I was invited? So thank you for having me. I would say for me, when I started making the decision, I'm fortunate that I have a lot of people in my life who are in the medical world. So I'm the daughter of a doctor. My sister works at a biodefense firm working on the COVID vaccine, and she's a project manager there with a science background. One of my best friends is a doctor. So I have a lot of resources of people who can kind of decipher some of the more complicated studies out there. But we're also able to send me some of that information. So because I have a history of autoimmune condition, I am maybe a little bit more familiar and comfortable reading some of that detailed stuff. So the first thing I would say is really encouraging people to don't be afraid to get into the details, and bring those questions to your provider. Like for me, I have friends and family I can ask. If you have friends and family, go ahead and ask them. If you have, you know, providers you can ask, don't be afraid to do that. Like that's what they're there for. So that would be my number one thing in terms of like advocating for yourself is don't be afraid to look at the research. Just because you're a lay person doesn't mean that you're not a smart person. So you can definitely figure it out and figure out what questions you have. For me personally, I very likely had COVID before they were testing people because I had not been to China. So I was very, very, very ill from January to February last year and had like breathing problems and whatnot and wasn't able to breathe properly until 5 months after that March time period. So, and then the month after is when I got pregnant. So for me, I had the experience of what was likely COVID to kind of go back on and reference. And I tend towards the more alternative, like supplementation and whatnot. I'm sure some of the doctors on here might be cringing about that. But I have huge respect for the medical field. It's just for my autoimmune conditions, that's how I got into remission, was actually pursuing kind of alternative methods and whatnot after like 24 years of being flared. So it was an adventure. So for me, I think it was interesting because I have a lot of friends who are very anti-vax, because I sit in this kind of middle place, right? Of being alternative, but then also having a lot of medical influence in my life. And so for me, I went into it kind of like, what is going to be best for me and best for my baby? And when it came down to it, I really asked myself the question, what, if I was making this decision from a place of love, what would I make? Like, what decision would I make? And I realized that for me, the loving decision, and again, this is my decision, the loving decision was for me to get vaccinated and to be protected so that I could be there for my daughter, for my son, who I already have, and not have the kind of fear of being ill or whatnot, because I had experienced it in the past. So I would say really ask yourself, and it could be different for someone else, like making that decision out of love versus fear could end up in a different answer for another mom. But for me, that answer was I wanted to get the vaccine because it felt like the right thing to do. And the one piece I was worried about was fevers. So I asked my provider about that. I even brought it up to this group when we were doing kind of our prep call. But that has been something consistently moms that I've talked to have expressed concern about, is the side effect of fever, especially after the second vaccination. So I'd love for if one of the experts on this call could address that, because it's definitely a key concern of mine that was alleviated with some of the answers I got.
So we'll get to that in just a sec, but just to get back to your experience, when you made the decision to get the vaccine, you were weighing, you think you probably had COVID earlier in the year.
Mm-hmm.
You knew how that affected you physically. And so when you got pregnant, you were sort of weighing, what would it be like to go through that, not just again myself, but with my baby, versus whatever potential risks that you might have thought there were with the vaccine, right? I mean, that was sort of you were sort of weighing those kinds of things in your mind, it sounds like.
Yes. And I mean, I was so sick, and because they thought I had walking pneumonia because nobody was diagnosing it at the time. I mean, I literally had a few days where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. Like I couldn't breathe, and nobody was taking it seriously because COVID wasn't a thing, so I'm at home trying to navigate it with a little inhaler. And so I just can't imagine being pregnant, right? The bigger you get, the harder it is to breathe anyways. So I couldn't imagine having that additional layer, absolutely, of experience to be pregnant and trying to go through that.
So I want to go to Facebook questions, but just to answer that question that you just raised, Kate, about elevated temperature, right, when you're pregnant. We know that can pose some risks to the baby. You're asking in the context of when you get the vaccine, one of the side effects can be an elevated temperature. Of course, with COVID, you can have an elevated temperature. Which of the doctors would like to talk about which risk is greater or how to manage those things? Cersei, would you like to go?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So one of the ways I like to think about this a little bit, and you've really kind of set the stage for that, Stacy, is you got to pick a team here. People can't sit on the sidelines. This is a highly, highly contagious virus. And we've witnessed millions and millions of people that we know through various stages get sick. So you either have to pick team vaccine or team get COVID, because it will continue to be a highly contagious virus that is spread. It is not going to disappear. So pick your team. Now, you're absolutely correct. When your immune system responds to something, you have a fever. It's part of the communication tools that your immune system uses called interleukins that give you that fever. But the fever is much milder and can be readily controlled with Tylenol, which is perfectly safe in pregnancy when you're getting that vaccine. It's a totally different ballgame when you get sick with COVID. And we know that pregnant women have about 5 times the rate of not only being hospitalized, but requiring life-saving measures when compared to non-pregnant women. So I know which team I want to be on. I'm on team vaccine. And we just can't sit on the sidelines waiting to see what happens here. You got to pick that team. And either of those are going to have different things that can happen. And certainly many women won't get sick even when they get COVID. But why not take that guaranteed team of the vaccine?
You made a great point about the teams. And the other thing is, if you don't pick a team, you automatically end up on the team COVID.
It's sooner or later, unfortunately, and if we don't get this under control, it's yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So I want to turn it to some Facebook questions, and literally I'm going to throw them out. So hop in and answer whoever feels like they want to answer, and whatever follow up. So the first question is really, I heard there's only been animal studies from mRNA prior to COVID. This person really wanted us to provide links to safety studies for humans, pregnant women prior to COVID-19. Okay, we've got the links, but can you just speak to that, Cersei?
Yeah, so the mRNA vaccine studies with Zika virus were animal studies. Those were not human studies. The Ebola studies, I provided the link to, were done in human populations. But the Zika virus mRNA ones were only done in non-human primate models and mouse models.
Okay, but the truth, but we did have studies that were beyond animal studies for mRNA prior to COVID. That's your point, and I'm sure those links are now on the Facebook chat.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. The second question is, what should we watch for in the future regarding long-term complications? This is something I've really heard from a lot of women. You know, oh great, well, you know, just a month or two or a few weeks after the vaccine, there's been no red flags, but what about the long-term complications? What potentially might be the risk there for women who take the vaccine while pregnant? And is there a safer, I think this is another question that comes up later, is there a safer time frame to take it while you're pregnant? Is it better to take it in the first trimester or second trimester or third trimester? What do we know about that? I'll just throw it open to whoever would like to answer.
Get it when you can. As soon as you can. Get it as soon as you can, whenever you can.
Yeah. And then the thing, people, ask questions about long-term consequences from the vaccine, but we have to be very honest in knowing that we really are still learning about potential long-term consequences of having COVID as well, and realizing that there are real potential consequences from the infection itself. And it goes right back to that, weighing that risk benefit. We're worried about the vaccine, but really the real concern and fear should be around what the potential long-term consequences are of having the infection.
I think that you can't know the long-term consequences until it's been long-term.
Exactly.
However, something that Cersei was mentioning earlier, I think is really important to understand. And I've been explaining I've been asked by a lot of patients, should I get the vaccine? And I can say that the national societies say that it should be made available. But when someone asks me, I'm also allowed to give my opinion. And my opinion is I recommend it. And as Cersei said, whenever you can get it. But I think one of the important things to understand in regard to long-term effects is that people hear messenger RNA and they immediately think of some change in DNA, or in that your genetics and either you or the baby are going to be changed. And it's very important to understand that the messenger RNA goes into the cell. It doesn't go into the nucleus where our genes are. It doesn't turn on genes. It doesn't turn off genes. And there's not even a concern about that. That's not even what people are studying. It goes in, and as Cersei said, it uses the same machinery that our cells use to make other proteins, to make this one viral spike protein that then causes our bodies to make the antibodies that all vaccines have done. So we don't know the long-term effects yet, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that there would be any biology to explain long-term outcomes. And the fertility, I anticipate there's a question there about the fertility issue.
Yes.
That has not been proven at all. There, in my opinion, there's nothing to that story.
Yes, there are a lot of questions about that. Cersei, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think the three that I really hear from patients are around risk of miscarriage and stillbirth, risk of infertility, and risk of long-term concerns for their baby, to which I say the only long-term things I can think about are positive ones, right? You're preparing your baby that's developing in the womb to live in the COVID world. And that's the world your baby's going to enter into. Sometimes I like to think of it as a womb with a view of what that world is going to look like when that baby emerges. And it's one where COVID's in it. So if we can arm that baby with some antibodies like we talked about earlier, then that's to the benefit. There is absolutely no biologic reason whatsoever to think that this mRNA molecules are going to have any long-term sequelae because they disappear, right? One of the challenges with these vaccines is we have to have this cold storage process, because you expose mRNA molecules, they're very short-lived molecules, and you expose them into even room temperature for periods of time, they're gone. Well, your body is naturally 97 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it's there, it gets taken up into the cells, and then it's gone. It doesn't sit around. It's a blueprint, it's burned up, it's gone. So we can't imagine what in heaven's name the biology would be that would lend to those long-term risks. But they're not being realized in the 51,000 people that are reported to date in the US. And we don't know what scientifically that would be. So it's really hard to imagine. Again, this is the new generation of vaccine safety.
So I just want to go to that point again about, and I think we almost probably can't say this enough about the myths, the reports, the rumors, whatever, about miscarriages, stillbirths after the vaccine. People have heard that there are reports that there are miscarriages of stillbirth. There's information being spread about that. What can you all say definitively about any reports, any of stillbirth, miscarriages after women have received the vaccine? I just want us to be very clear and on the record about this.
Stacy, let me give the data. I think Cersei's about to say something, but I saw the question there, so I pulled up the VAERS report, and this is through February 18 this year. The miscarriage rate is actually lower in the VSafe registry, 15% compared to background rates, and the stillbirth rate is 0.6 to 1. I mean, it's slightly higher, but I doubt it's a statistically significant difference, and it's still a very low rate. So those are the data that I was able to pull up on miscarriage and stillbirth as the most recent that I have from the VAERS program.
And I would just echo that. I think the data that we're seeing emerging, so remember in the original Pfizer and Moderna trials, there were some women who became incidentally pregnant. And the only situations of miscarriage and stillbirth that occurred were actually in the placebo arms. And so what we may be seeing is that there may be a baseline higher rate of miscarriage when you get COVID, which none of us would be surprised about, because if anytime a mom is really sick, including with a high fever, that's where that happens. And so what we may be seeing is a trend where you see a benefit in that protection from getting COVID. So I think there's absolutely no data out there that we're aware of reported through the CDC or through the initial clinical trials where people came in incidentally pregnant that suggest that there's any increased risk of miscarriage or stillbirth. Those occurred in the placebo group.
Okay, that's really helpful. There's another question about what about ingredients in the vaccine? Can they cross the placenta? And are they safe for the baby? So any other ingredients in the vaccine itself?
Well, one thing I can say that this vaccine does not have preservatives or adjuvants or that have been used in some other vaccines that potentially could be of concern for a pregnancy. The other thing is the main concern that we've had for a lot of the ingredients that are in this vaccine have been other vaccines that we've used that have been safely used in pregnancy. And then the other issue is that usually the only concerns we've had in the past with vaccines and its ingredients or its components have been with live vaccines. And this is not a live vaccine, and the ingredients that are in these vaccines have been used in other vaccines that have been deemed safe.
Okay. Great. There is another question on, is there one of the vaccines that is more recommended for pregnant women? If so, again, this is more in the time frame of when to get it, first, second, third trimester. I think I know the answer to this, but if we could just say again, is there a vaccine that is recommended more than others? And again, is there a particular time frame that is seen to be more safe or effective, or makes a difference with respect to when to get it during pregnancy?
We recommend the one that's available to you. So whichever one's available, take it. And then, you know, we won't be surprised if we see down the road that people end up getting boosters in different combinations. I think Dr. Fauci has spoke very openly about that. And so has Dr. Osterholm. So I think we won't be surprised if we see that, but get whichever one is available to you as soon as it's available to you. Again, there's no safety data that we are worried about. And so first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, doesn't matter. Get it when it's available to you.
I'd like to offer my perspective too, because this came up when I was actually in getting the vaccine. I was in there and I had like the nurse and the head nurse of the clinic came in and they said, "Oh, that's great. You're getting Moderna. Like that one is better for pregnant women." And I was just like, what? Because none of my research, right, as an experienced research, had said that. And so I asked about it afterwards, you know, asked my sister, asked people I knew, and they were like, no, there's no like scientific, I don't know why they would say that to you. But my point is, like, even in the doctor's office, sometimes they're giving you information that isn't necessarily accurate. So don't be afraid to kind of push further to ask more questions if it's not clear to you.
That's a great point. There's another question about whether or not it's safer or better to get the vaccine. What if you're thinking about becoming pregnant? Should you go ahead and get the vaccine before pregnancy? Or is it better to protect the baby to have it during pregnancy? Do we know anything about that? Or does it even matter?
Doesn't matter. Get it when you can.
Wait, get it when you can. That's a get it when you can.
I advocate for getting it before pregnancy, simply to avoid getting COVID, to have a longer period of time of protection against COVID, period.
Great point. There's another question about, are they enrolling pregnant women who aren't getting vaccinated in the control to compare to women who are getting vaccinated? And assume that's true.
It is a placebo-controlled trial. That's true.
Yes.
So there is an
Yes.
arm where it's delayed and they will get it after the fact. There is no arm of the trial, meaning there's no subgroup of the trial where they won't get the vaccine at all. It's just, do you get it during pregnancy or do you get it after you deliver?
There's been a lot discussed in terms of vaccine hesitancy in communities of color. What I would say about that is that it's also really important to understand that there's also been problems of vaccine availability in communities of color that cannot be attributed to vaccine hesitancy. So we really have more than just one issue going on in communities of color. But are there any updates on what you all have seen, especially with pregnant women of color and their questions or concerns about the vaccine? Are we seeing some of that same vaccine hesitancy with respect to women, pregnant women of color, as we're seeing in communities of color overall?
I think you brought up a very good point, Stacy, that this is not just an issue of hesitancy. And I think, you know, although there are people who are saying they're not going to take the vaccine, I just said over 60%, in the most recent survey, over 60% of African Americans have said that they would take it when it becomes available to them. And I would assume that that would include pregnant women. But we have to also remember that access is a real issue. And even when we look at, you know, the CDC recommendations of the different risk groups, and that, you know, pregnant women are designated as a high risk group that should be included in 1C, there are some states that are still not including pregnant women in that group. And so that's an access issue. There are still, you know, issues about how to get the vaccine, you know, how to sign up for it, having access to some places where you have to sign up online, knowing where to get it. and how to get it is a real issue. And I'm sitting in the state of Georgia, and unfortunately, Georgia is one of the states that's had the worst rollouts of the vaccine. So we have to consider when we talk about this issue of hesitancy, it's not just about attitudes, it's about access. But in my experience, just in the pregnant women I've talked to, they've said that they wanted it if they were eligible to get it.
Well, we had a terrible story, and I've heard this in a few other places, but I live in the Washington D.C. area in Northern Virginia. There was a pregnant woman who drove 2 hours to make her vaccine appointment. And when she got there, she was obviously pregnant, and she was refused the vaccine. So what should you do if you want the vaccine? You sign up for the vaccine. You're pregnant, you are willing to take it, and you get there and your provider says, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you the vaccine because you're pregnant. Is there anything you can do at that point?
I honestly, Stacy, don't know what to do at that point. I mean, I don't know when you show up at the vaccine center. But what I can reassure folks on this call is that, you know, we have a large distribution center at Penn, and my understanding is, I'm very hopeful that the incident you're describing is very isolated, and people shouldn't anticipate that could happen to them, because the message is, as again, Dr. Agard said, the messenger RNA has a very short shelf life. So in general, we are told if a person is there to get the vaccine, even if they aren't high risk, like, you know, some kid shows up at 25 years old, perfectly healthy, we're not supposed to turn them away, because at the end of the day, you're then throwing out vaccines. So if you're in the marching orders at most of the vaccine clinics is, if the person's in line, now is not the time to question whether they should be getting the vaccine or not. Give them the vaccine so you're not throwing away vaccine at the end of the day. So I'm hopeful that would be a very isolated incident.
Yeah, I hope so too.
I think just very practically, there's kind of a couple different routes they could go. So I think a number of us have been called when there've been questions through the state DSHS site, so the Department of Social Health Services. You can call the CDC. So there's actually patient call numbers for the CDC that you could call. And then you could call your provider and say, hey, I'm here to get the vaccine and they're not willing to give it to me, because that should never happen. And so I'm with Sam that I think it's probably a one-off and isolated. So I would say I wouldn't expect that'd be the response, but any of those are routes you could call. And I would just kind of, you know, find a comfortable place to sit and wait it out to get those callbacks. And I'm confident that you will get that vaccine before you walk out the door.
That's great. Just we're going to end pretty soon, but just a couple other quick questions. One is about breastfeeding. We talked about pregnancy, but breastfeeding. Just can we just discuss and make sure we know what information women should know about it? Is it safe to get the vaccine if someone is breastfeeding and they have a newborn baby?
Yep, perfectly safe. Yay.
Absolutely.
Thumbs up. We need that little thumbs up reaction. Yes, that's right. Yes, it is safe. And if you're able to get the vaccine, whenever you're able to get the vaccine, if you're breastfeeding, consider it safe for you and your baby.
Yep.
There was another question too about, and there is a question about what resources are available for lactating parents. I'm hoping we can put those in the chat with some links. There's another question about should pregnant women be tested for the presence of COVID antibodies before getting the vaccine? And if they have antibodies, should they go ahead and get the vaccine?
Yeah, so first of all, no, they don't have to be tested in advance. And the reason for that is because we recommend that even if you've had COVID, you still get the vaccine. And that's because when you've had COVID, the antibodies that stick around longer are against a different part of the virus. They're called anti-nucleocapsid antibodies. And we really want those spike protein antibodies in abundance. Those are the neutralizing antibodies that are really good at defending off that virus from infecting the other cells in your body. So we're really after those anti-spike protein antibodies. which you don't tend to have as much of after you've had a natural infection. So whether you have antibodies or not is irrelevant, because we're still going to recommend the vaccine.
Cersei, is that why we're also hearing some cases of people that are getting reinfected with COVID after having had it the first time?
Yeah, and the second component to it is we do know that there is at least some degree of efficacy and protection against emerging strain variants. So with the vaccines that aren't going to occur with the natural infection. So kind of the second answer to that is it may give you a little bit of a broader net to be protected against, not just against the strain you were infected with. And so for that reason, it varies a little bit by the vaccine. And I think that data is still emerging. It'll take a little while to know. But those are really the two reasons why there are benefits that even if you've had COVID, it's an advantage. Number one, you'll have a more robust neutralizing antibody response to the spike protein, which is what wards off that virus. And number two, it'll provide some cross protection against other viral variant strains.
That's awesome. We're going to finish this. Kate, I want to just ask you the last question. If you had seen this webinar before you made your decision to give the vaccine, would it have been helpful to you in your decision-making process?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of information here that, and I shared this with someone, when I was saying, hey, I'm going to be on this. And in the prep call, I was already learning things that I didn't even know in my research. So again, research lightly, but, I think that it was absolutely helpful. And, I hope others find it helpful, and I will definitely be sharing out the link with others who I know might benefit from it. So thank you for hosting this.
Well, I'm glad you did your own research, and I'm glad this is, hopefully this is we're able to help a lot of other women that may have been that may be now in the situation you found yourself in some time ago, to get information on how to stay safe through the pandemic and how to keep you and your baby safe as well. I want to say thank you to all the panelists for this really amazing conversation. You all answered a lot of questions that I had myself. And so I feel like I'm not pregnant. I got a lot out of this myself to help so many women that we're trying to help. So this has been really great. It's really important to stay informed about COVID-19 and vaccinations. Obviously, these panelists have given us a ton of information. It's really important to check the websites of your state and local health departments. The CDC is always updating, obviously, with a ton of information. Just encourage you all to stay as updated as you possibly can. And March of Dimes is always posting new information about COVID-19, about the vaccines. As you all know, we launched a COVID-19 fund so that we could fund some of the research that you heard, for example, Dr. Sam Perry is working on and others. That's our role at the March Times, is to try to advance as much science and evidence as we can to make sure that women, pregnant women, families have all the information that you need in order to be as equipped and well-informed as you possibly can be. Your support to that COVID-19 fund has been super important, and it continues to be super important. So if you want to support the great work of the March of Dimes, support the work we're doing around COVID-19, the vaccines, that fund is still available. If you want to make any kind of size donation to that we would be, greatly appreciative of that. There are also a bunch of links here, the CDC links. I have been vaccinated myself. I've signed up for VSafe. I got the text every day and let CDC know my own condition. That is really super helpful, because this public information is what helps us understand more about the vaccine and how it actually is showing up in the population with a variety of different populations, pregnant women included. So that health checker, that VSafe health checker after vaccination is super important. If you've gotten your vaccine, please sign up for that, and please submit the information so that we can all benefit. The last thing I'll just say is that the March Times is well underway. Some of you all are deeply involved in March for Babies. We want to ask you all to get deeply involved with March for Babies, even if you're not. This is the time. We really are looking at both healthy moms, strong babies. This March for Babies is also called a mother of a movement. We are trying to create a mother of a movement to make sure that moms and babies have the help they need. You can be a part of that. You can be a part of making sure that every single mom, every single baby is as healthy as possible, especially through this pandemic. So please sign up at marchforbabies.org. It's super fun. It's going to be virtual, but it'll be tons of fun, and you can get your family and friends engaged as well. I want to again thank our panelists for joining us today. Thanks for being on. We're so grateful to all of what you all do. So grateful that you're sharing your not only your knowledge and expertise, but your experiences as well. And we look forward to seeing a lot of you all at our next Healthy Moms Strong Babies webinar, which will be happening next month. So thank you all so much, and great to see you all, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.